Thank you, Glenn. My name's Brian. I'm an alcoholic by popular demand. I don't think there was a big posse of people want me back, Glenn. I think it was just you. But nonetheless, I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I was just before I logged on. I try not to prepare, but I was just thinking, what should I talk about whenever I'm speaking to these guys? And the first thing that comes to mind, always whenever I consider that, is talk about a life beyond your wildest dreams. At the time, I was holding a toilet plunger in my hand, though, trying to unblock a toilet, and all the mess you would expect coming off the back of such an exercise was going through my mind, and I was thinking it doesn't really feel like a life beyond my wildest dreams in this moment. But nonetheless, I was able to go through today without taking a drink, Glenn, not once. And nor did I ever have the notion that that might be a good idea. I haven't had the conscious notion of taking a drink in years, and I don't find that difficult at all. I find it ridiculously easy. I don't fight alcohol one day at a time. I don't fight alcohol ever. I've completely ceased fighting anything and anyone, even alcohol. So let's start with that. So for a guy like me to not consume alcohol as part of daily life is impossible. Completely and utterly impossible. So whenever I talk about a life beyond my wildest dreams, I need to begin with that. That very, very simple understanding that an alcoholic by definition, which is what I am, doesn't have to drink alcohol. But if you look at the definition of an alcoholic in the dictionary, it talks about a man who has a dependence on alcohol. And I don't. I don't have a dependence on alcohol. Now, does that mean I'm not alcoholic? I still have the physical allergy to alcohol. And that's how we define alcoholism and Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, if I was to take that first drink in some moment of madness, something will happen inside of me in both the bodily and mental sense that will make it virtually impossible for me to stop. And I'm acutely aware of that. But I don't have this dependency. I don't have this need. I don't think, oh my God, how can I get a drink to get me through the day? At all, ever. Now, I've said that in some meetings and they've called me a heretic and you can't be saying that. You're going to cause people to relapse and all this weird shit. And I don't know where this dependence on alcohol one day at a time notion came from, but I can't find it anywhere in the literature. Anywhere. The closest thing I can find to it is Bill D it was suggested to him that he should try not to drink alcohol for 24 hours at the early stages of his recovery. And my sponsor said that to me. You know, sometimes it's just try and get through the first hour, you know, but that's while I'm working through the program. It wasn't a permanent solution to live like that. You know, where you wake up in the morning, you pray for God for a sober day, and then put your head on a pillow, sweating, shitting yourself, going, oh my God, I made it through another day. I can't believe my luck. That I don't want to live like that. If that's what's an offer, I don't want it. I don't want it. But I can't see that offer anywhere. I can't see it anywhere, Glenn. I've looked. What I have seen an offer, though, is all this woo-woo talk of miracles and spiritual things and all that kind of stuff, which I find equally as off-putting whenever I first come in. A few years down the line, I can tell you now that the awareness of the presence of God in my heart is undoubtedly the most important thing in my life and the only thing to which I need to apply effort. The only thing in my life to which I need to apply effort. My ego doesn't remember that every day, mind you, but nonetheless, that is the reality. The only thing to which I need to apply effort in my life is to remain aware of the presence of God in my heart. So, well, what kind of alcoholic am I? I'm the kind that it talks about in page 44. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. That's the way it used to be. Couldn't quit entirely. Tried many times and couldn't quit entirely. I'm sure that same applies to everybody in this room. Otherwise, what the hell are you doing here? The other thing that it mentions there, or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take. So both of those described my alcoholism at the time. Excuse me just one second. Thank you. Sorry about that. My youngest daughter decided that was a good opportunity to kick into a wee song. As much as I enjoy her singing, it wasn't perfectly timed. So those symptoms of alcoholism are the ones from which I used to suffer. So I don't know. The like before coming to AA, did you guys try to fight it? Because like I know I did. Like I thought I could beat the game. Do you know what I mean? And I thought I even tried community, being around groups of people and other alcoholics who were trying to quit and, giving each other the nudge up and all. I tried all of that before it came to AA. I was certain that wasn't going to work for me. But whenever I see things like, well, on page 46, where it says, as soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction. It doesn't strike me as this fighting kind of a deal. Do you know what I mean? And then, of course, we think of the very obvious one that we've heard so many times before, where it says, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. It actually specifically says that this is not about fighting alcohol. That's not how it works. AA does not work on the basis you fight alcohol. It says here, goes on to say how it does work, for by this time sanity will have returned. So it's about the returning to sanity in respect to alcohol. And what does insanity look like? Well, the book defines it as the lack of proportion of the ability to think straight. If I have the lack of the proportion of the ability to think straight in respect to alcohol, that's what makes me insane. Where I've got these two parallel lines. One that if I drink again, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my family, I'm going to end up in a loony asylum again, whatever. Another parallel line saying, yeah, but if you just eat a BLT with a glass of milk, you'll be all right. And eventually one of those only one's going to win the race, Glenn. And eventually the insanely trivial excuse wins out. That's insanity. That's the lack of the proportion of the ability to think straight. Now, whenever that sanity returns, why do I need to fight? We will seldom be interested in liquor. Great. If tempted, I was tempted about a week ago. What did that temptation look like? I was driving into work. It was warm, which is very unusual in this time of year, but nonetheless, it was warm. There was a Heineken advert, billboard with condensation go down the side of the bottle. I thought, damn, doesn't that look refreshing? Do you know why I thought that, Glenn? Because it looked refreshing and I kept driving. That was the full extent of my temptation. That was it. It was an observation rather than a temptation. We react sanely and normally. That's what I did there. I reacted sanely and normally. And we find this has happened automatically. I didn't look at it and go, shit, I better phone my sponsor and, I better go and dig out my big book and do a routine, whatever. It just happened. I didn't even think about it other than that observation. And now how much effort did I put into that? We will see that our new attitude towards liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. None. I put no effort into it, not a bit. And what it says here is that it happens without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We are neither fighting it, there it is again, nor are we avoiding temptation. I don't avoid temptation. I like watching sport in the pub. I love watching sport in the pub. You watching any rugby, Shay, over the last while? So there you go. South Africans and the Irish are not exactly thrilled with the outcome, but there's an awful lot of sport happening down the pub. So I was very, very keen to be in the pub. And do you know what happens in pubs? People drink bloody alcohol. Who cares? Doesn't make any difference to me. I sit there not drinking alcohol. That's the only thing that differentiates me from them. And they talk an awful lot of shite halfway through the evening. But nonetheless, I'm able to go and embrace that evening. I don't avoid it. I don't not go to weddings. I don't do any of that avoidance stuff. I don't know what it is to be triggered into drinking alcohol, whatever the hell that means. It's not, I do the miracle thing. And whenever I'm doing the whole God miracle thing, I don't need to worry about that kind of stuff. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We'd not even sworn off, said the problem had been removed, does not exist for us. So that doesn't sound too difficult. So it goes on to say that this is how we...
How's everybody doing today?
Well said. It goes on to say this is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. So this is getting back to this point that I was saying before, to be reminded of the awareness of the presence of God within my heart is the only thing to which I need to apply effort. I don't apply effort to fighting alcohol. I apply effort to being spiritually awake. I do that every day. I do that one day at a time. I do that one moment at a time. I do that every time I feel selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, or fear. I do that. I remove the blocks between me and this God that I was able to find. But like, I would like to talk about the process of becoming in contact with God, because I would have been one of those atheist type guys. I'm not even sure that I know what that means anymore. But I certainly didn't believe that there would be some kind of a force outside of what's visible, outside of what maybe could earn a PhD that could help a guy like me. I didn't think that was a thing. And I was blessed with a sponsor who had an intimate understanding of the book Alcoholics Anonymous and knew how to work through that. And in particular, the information that comes from the chapter We Agnostics. Because I guess I thought that anything spiritual maybe tips his hat to religion. So you're going to start looking at my morals and what about all that? That's what I thought, was going to happen here. But what it says on page 44 is if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. So if it's just about do the next right thing, put other people before you, this code of morals, make sure you don't, always tell the truth is what somebody told me whenever I come in. If I bloody knew how to tell the truth all the time, I wouldn't be here asking you guys for help. Imagine telling somebody just sober to start telling the truth. Like, God, I had no idea. And it's not about adopting a different code of morals or a better philosophy of life. It turns out, Glenn, the code of morals that I already had was a damn good one. Now, I couldn't live up to it, but the code of morals was fine. My philosophy of life was perfectly fine. I couldn't live up to that either. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. That's the deficiency. Lack of power, that was my dilemma. So if it is that it's just a case of me changing my moral compass and working harder at it, that implies that I already have that power there. And I just need to go and engage that shit. But what it's saying here is that's not the case. I don't have the power. There's nothing wrong with my morals. Maybe there are, but that's not it. That's not what we're looking at. What we're looking at is powerlessness. And where am I to find this power? It says, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Alcoholics Anonymous and the God to be found within Alcoholics Anonymous is to be found in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is only in the book Alcoholics Anonymous and nowhere else. That's exactly what this book is about. Its main objective is enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Not might, not which has a good chance of solving your problem, which will. With the application of the program within the book Alcoholics Anonymous, the problem will be solved. So you just read the book and everything goes away. Well, not quite. Because what it says here on page 46 towards the bottom, it says, we find that God does not make too hard terms for those who seek. To us, the realm of spirit, capitalized, is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It's not just about reading this book. It's about earnestly seeking. What does earnestly mean? It means with sincere and intense conviction. So if I'm applying myself to Alcoholics Anonymous and the program within with sincere and intense conviction that the God of my understanding will not make too hard terms for me. But it's not for half-assing it and wondering why miracles aren't happening. It's not about warming a seat one day at a time, watching other people having miracles and being envious that they're not happening to me. It's about earnestly seek. It's about the strict adherence and application of the program outlined within this book. But it starts with, my understanding rather, is that it starts with, well, it's not my understanding, it's what it says. It says we found out as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. All right, so I come in here, just wanted to stop drinking. I wasn't interested in your religion or your God or whatever. I just wanted to stop drinking. So I could start with that. You know what? Fine, I'll be open-minded. I am willing. I want the pain to stop. You know, the sort of willingness that we're talking about here is not the sort of willingness of, you know what, I think I'll phone my friend Francie who will tell me how to pursue a new spiritual life for the 12 steps because I've got fuck all else to do next week. It's the sort of willingness that it talks about on page 48. It says, though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. It says, faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded in spiritual matters as we had tried to be in other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Was I willing? Yes, in the kicking and screaming kind of willingness. Like, I've nowhere else to go. I'm in agony. Just make the pain stop kind of willingness. That's the kind of willingness that I brought to the table. And in that position, whenever I'm watching a man in whom the problem has been solved, it's saying to me, listen, buddy, you got to be at least open-minded here and lay aside prejudice or I can't help you. My response is, you guys are weird, but whatever. Oh, okay, fine. I'll do it, whatever. Just make the pain stop. The power of that willingness, I felt very, very quickly. Now, it was quite some time before the obsession to drink alcohol left me. I'm not one of the guys who come into the rooms and was hit by a thunderbolt. I didn't get that relief until I was halfway through step 9. Such is the level of my stubbornness. But it did start to feel that something was starting to change. You know, it says here, as soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he's on his way. That's how I felt. I felt like I was on his way. It says it was repeatedly proven that among the simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective structure can be built. Now, I like that term cornerstone. It's a really interesting one to me. Sorry, Glenn. So, like these masonry terms used quite a lot in the book, aren't they? And you sort of think of this cornerstone. I lifted a tissue box there, but you know, whenever these guys were building a building, they would take such a huge amount of time and precision with their little water levels and spirit levels or whatever to get the cornerstone put in place. They took ages laying that damn thing. But once that was in place, the rest of the walls took their level from the cornerstone. Such was the importance of that particular stone. So whenever it talks about, whenever I believe or even being willing to believe that that's done, the cornerstone's laid, everything else can take its level from that, but get that done. And if I'm coming in here without that willingness to lay aside prejudice and to be open-minded, and I've got nothing. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous is not for a guy like that, is my observations. I remember being at a meeting before, and a guy came in and he had just stopped drinking the previous day. And he says, I've come in here for somebody to try and persuade me why I should stop drinking. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. That's way outside of my wheelhouse. You know, I couldn't persuade myself why I needed to stop drinking. Because that's not the sort of willingness that would have worked for a guy like me. Maybe it would have worked for this guy. I had a go to try and persuade him, but I never seen him again, and I'm not surprised. But the sort of willingness that works for a guy like me is a sort of willingness that leaves me with absolutely no choice whatsoever to at least be open-minded to what's on offer here. So I did that, Glenn. I remained open-minded, and I found myself then in this position where the program of Alcoholics Anonymous was asking me to at least find a reasonable assumption as a starting point. Why the hell should I believe a word of what this complete stranger said? He doesn't have a PhD in alcoholic recovery, if that's such a thing. He's just some bozo that used to drink loads of booze and doesn't anymore. Why the hell should I believe him? Well, I needed this reasonable assumption as a starting point. And some of the examples that was presented to me was the one, well, page 48 talks about electricity. Now, Glenn, you're clearly a much smarter guy than me. My friend Francie is infinitely smarter than I am, but maybe you guys understand how electricity works. I haven't got a clue. My mate Kathy, I bet you she knows. Look at her. She can tell she's smart. Now, I was taking a guy through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we got to this page, and I said that, and it turns out he was an electrical engineer, and he went on to explain how electricity works to me for 40 bloody minutes. It was hellishly painful, and I still don't have a clue. Not a notion. You electrical engineer, Glenn? Right, let's not talk about that, because I'm not going through that pain again. So for 40 minutes, and I still don't have a clue. But let me tell you something, right? Whenever I came into this room this morning, there's a switch as you walk in through that door. I flicked that switch and the damn thing switched on. Now, did I look at it going, oh my God, look, lights come on, it's amazing. I don't even remember doing it. I don't even remember doing it. I just switched the damn thing on and I went about my day. Why? Why, if something that's so miraculous and outside my level of understanding happened right in front of my eyes, why did I not give a monkeys? Because I'd seen it happen so many times before that I just presumed it would happen again. It was that simple. It was a reasonable assumption for me to switch on the light switch and it would work. Is that because I studied electricity thoroughly and got myself to a level of deep understanding, whatever? I didn't do any of that. I'm way too lazy and not smart enough to do any of that. I just kept doing it and it just kept working and I just keep doing it and it just keeps working. So I believe that's going to work. Another suggestion here is a prosaic steel girder. Now, I work in a tall building, as tall as buildings can get in Belfast, which is not that tall, and they're held together with steel girders. Now, I have no idea how steel girders are put together. I have no idea how architects design the plans. I have no idea how engineers and builders all structure it all together in their way of doing it. But I walk in there in the morning and I don't even remember walking into work this morning, not because I was hungover, just because I was half asleep. And I didn't walk in looking up at the ceiling precariously wondering, is this the day whenever this would collapse on me? Why, Glenn? Because I walk into tall buildings all the time. I walk into steel structures all the time and never have I had one fall on my head and crush me. Not one. So it is reasonable for me to assume that whenever I walk into the office tomorrow, I'm not going to die from the building collapsing on me. Would that be reasonable? I think that's a reasonable assumption as a starting point before I start work tomorrow. So then whenever I find myself with people in whom the problem had been solved, by first laying aside prejudice and applying a spiritual program of action, I then had to decide what is reasonable and what isn't. Now, I would love to say that I was surrounded by lots of people who were working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous from the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm sorry to say that wasn't my experience. I was surrounded by lots of people who were miserable one day at a time in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I just got lucky and I met a guy who happened to be in my neck of the woods who had the program and spoke about the program. And he introduced me to other people who had worked the program and he wasn't miserable one day at a time fighting it. I'll go off on a bit of a sidebar. This part here where A newcomer needs a reasonable assumption as a starting point. If I'm bringing somebody through the book Alcoholics Anonymous and I'm using electricity, I'm using the prosaic steel girder and all these reasonable assumptions, and then I'm saying, look around you in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and you see loads of people in whom the problem had been solved, is it not reasonable to assume it would be solved for you? And they're saying to me, but most of these bastards are miserable. The second time that was said to me was the day I decided to start an AA group and to ground that AA group in the teachings of Alcoholics Anonymous only, and to fill it full of recovered alcoholics who talk about having a life beyond their wildest dreams and a life of abundance, and how they don't fight alcohol, and how life, whenever you do this deal with God and blowing the sail in your boat, that life gets infinitely better. Because you see, whenever I surround myself with people like Kathy and Francie and the other ones who are doing this deal, and then I'm helping somebody, they see them as a witness. And they're not just going by my experience. They're going by this bountiful pool of experience from people who have found this solution of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you for indulging that sidebar. I do enjoy that little rant from time to time, pretty much every time. But nonetheless, I think it's really important to talk about that because, you know, our fellowship's a wee bit crap in parts, isn't it? So the challenge for me, even at this part, where I'm saying to my sponsor, okay, look, we don't necessarily have to do the God thing. I heard somebody talking about atheist AA or something weird. You know, maybe that was an option. You see, the way that we went through the program, he had me do homework every week. Well, we actually met twice a week, but in between sessions, he had me doing homework. And the homework came from the last paragraph in the preface, where it said, if you have a drinking problem, we hope you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. In other words, I was reading the personal stories using that guide. So by the time it came around to here, I was fairly equipped in a good chunk of the personal stories at the back. And it says here that in our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Now, we're not talking about pick anything can be God, like a bloody doorknob or a chair, any of that crap. I'm not even indulging that nonsense. But there was different ways. Different people had different approaches as to how they identified with God. And whether we agree with the particular approach to conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. These are questions for each one to settle for himself. Okay, cool. So maybe you don't have to do the God thing is what I'm hearing. But no, because it says in one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them, without exception, has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. There's no way of doing Alcoholics Anonymous without God. None. It doesn't exist. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't recovery programs that one can't do that don't involve God or whatever. I've no opinion on that. But this recovery program here relies upon a power greater than me. Now, it doesn't tell me what that means. Mine's not that complicated, but I'm not going to talk about what it is because that would violate our 10th tradition. But the point being, it may well be different to Francie's. May well be different to Glenn's. Definitely different to Shay's. You know, who knows? But the point being, we don't all have to sit around and agree on this, but there's just such a, what's the word I'm looking for? There's such a payday from this. You know, they flatly declare that since they've come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude towards that power, which is defined on page 55, which we'll come to in a minute, and to do certain simple things, there's been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. A revolutionary change. Now, if you ever witnessed a revolution, it's a shit show. You know, it's not a minor adjustment. We're talking about a revolutionary change in the way of living and thinking. And I find it interesting that the order that those two are in, because what I find that this program really, really focuses on is my thinking. because my thinking now is infinitely different to how it used to be. And what effect does that have on my living? Well, I just need to worry about the thinking bit. Not even worry, but I need to focus on keeping God within my thoughts, because everything else is an outward manifestation of those thoughts. If my thoughts are of lack and fear and guilt and the decrepit world in which we find ourselves, and guess what? That's my experience and that's my reality. But this book doesn't talk of that. Doesn't talk of any of that. It talks about me removing those things, removing selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, sweeping away these blocks. Not that I remove them, but I'm turning to the power greater than myself for to have these things removed, to allow this flow of abundance, to allow this flow of altruism and love. And it's a completely different way of thinking. It was certainly completely different to me, because I had this thing where selfishness and self-centeredness was the root of all of it. And I couldn't see it. I couldn't see that selfishness and self-centeredness was the root of all my troubles. I didn't bring props here. This just happens to be sitting here. But if I look at this plant, I can't see the roots in that plant either. I can see the leaves, and if they get a wee bit brown, I'll pluck the leaves off, whatever. But, I'm relatively new to the houseplant thing. I only started figuring it out in lockdown, and I killed the damn things in no time because I kept loving them to death by pouring loads of water on them. Apparently you're not meant to do that because the roots go all rotten. Now, I was plucking away at the leaves and trying to improve all that, but the problem was under the surface. I didn't know that. I didn't know that that's where the problem lay. I didn't know that the aggregate thought system that I'd bought into was determining every single outcome in my life. And I don't mean have a happy thought for a day, because those moments come and go. Because with me, water will ultimately start running downhill eventually. My core values, my internal programming will essentially determine every single thing that happens in my life, and it won't take long. So if I can get to the root of the problem, which is underwritten by selfishness, self-centeredness, and fear, 100 forms of the damn things. If I can get to the root of that and have a revolutionary change in my thinking around those things, then what happens between my ears most of the time, I'd love to say all of the time, but anybody that knows me knows that I freak out sometimes too. But most of the time, those things are underwritten by love. Deep love. I'm a real lover. I love everybody. I love alcoholics. I don't like that guy that pissed me off in the office today, though. Drove me mad because I let it in. I let it in. I didn't let him in. He is what he is. I let my reactions to him in without seeing that those reactions and dealing with those reactions are not of me. I can't deal with my reactions to that guy any more than I can deal with not taking a drink today. And then whenever I realized that, I followed the procedures and the guidance that we have in here. And guess what? I'm back to loving everybody again. It's friggin' awesome. The idea that I've just presented there, it's just, I still find it, like, I'm only sober 6.5 years, and I still find it really amusing that I talk about this as if, like, yeah, that's the way it's always been. Like as if it's the norm. It's not the norm for me. This is not the norm, just to give this all over. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, none of this makes sense. Nothing that you guys have ever told me has ever made any sense. But whenever I do it, it just kind of works anyway. And I think about, in page 51, it talks about how the contemporaries of Columbus were giving him a hard time because he was talking about this spherical Earth kind of thing, because everybody knows the Earth's flat, right? So he's talking about, well, no, it's like it's a bit of a ball kind of thing. I'm going to go to India, but I'm going to go the wrong way. Well, whenever Columbus was saying that, his mates brought him down to the beach, and they're saying, "Now, Chris, wait a second. Look at the horizon; it's flat. You're clearly an idiot." So, like, they had all the visual evidence in their favor. And the reason why I'm saying that is because it's not necessarily important for this to make sense. Like, it makes sense. It made sense to the critics of Columbus to say you're talking shit. And the weight of argument was very, very much in their favor. Like the Galileo guy perpetuating Copernicus' theory that the Earth went around the sun. And they're sitting looking at the sun going around the earth, then looking at him and looking at the sun going around the earth going, this guy's a dickhead. Like, what is he talking about? Now, all the visual evidence was in their favor. It makes no sense. His argument makes no sense. Columbus's argument makes no sense, or at least made no sense at the time. But yet there it is. And were it important for me to find a way to take what you guys are saying and what the book Alcoholics Anonymous is saying and get it to make sense, then you might as well hand me my next bottle of whiskey. Because it didn't make sense to me. What about those Wright brothers, fellas? Like, they were bicycle mechanics, right? So you've got the Wright brothers who tinker around with bikes in one hand, and you've got Professor Langley in the other hand. Now, this guy was a genius. He was given all the money that he needed. You Americans wanted to beat the Russians at that. You wanted to be the first ones to put a plane in the sky. You guys love trying to be the first at stuff like, you guys rule the world now, which is amazing. We used to, you do it now, it's fine. But you wanted to be the first to put a plane in the sky. So Langley was given all the money that he needed, German engineers, whatever you need, Langley, off you go. So anyway, he exhausted all possibilities and concluded it can't be done. So that was fact. You cannot put a plane in the sky. Fact. Langley's proved it. Then a couple of guys who tinker around with bicycles put a plane in the sky, or at least so the story goes. And I'm sitting there as the news editor of the New York Times or the Washington Post, and somebody knocks on my door and says, yeah, drop the dead donkey. We've got this amazing story. There's a plane in the sky. Wow, did Langley find a way? No, a couple of bicycle mechanics. I would be saying we're not running that story. That is ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. We're not running that story. Now, that would be a reasonable response. The weight of evidence and argument was against what was fact, was against what was true. It wasn't important for me to fully understand and grasp this. It wasn't important for me to fully understand and grasp electricity or a prosaic steel girder, whatever the hell that means. I didn't need to understand any of that. But whenever I have the example of other people in whom the problem had been solved, that was the reasonable assumption that brought me to the place where I was willing to take the next step, which was to take this step from reason to faith, which is kind of weird. I find the language kind of weird, because I needed to understand what reason was, first of all. Because, right, one thing I knew for sure is the life that I was living up to that point didn't work. That's absolutely fact. It didn't work. I didn't come into Alcoholics Anonymous because I heard you guys made good coffee. I come in because it wasn't working. And then I'm sitting looking at people in whom it is working and saying, oh, this is a load of crap. So where does reason sit in all that? Reason doesn't sit in favor of what I was saying. In fact, that would be unreasonable. And the idea for me was more about switching where I was pointing my reason, because reason had been guiding me up to that point anyway. I've been completely relying on reasoning. I've been relying on the God of reason, my own personal reasoning, despite the fact that there was an abundance of evidence that didn't work. I relied upon it anyway. So I'm having to look at something non-tangible, and to look at something non-tangible to me means to try and get something that I can't compute in my head. And I'm having to look into my heart. What the hell does that mean? Well, I met this girl in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love her dearly. Love her dearly. She lives in a different country, so it costs money for her to come over. It's a pain in the ass. It costs money for me to go and see her. She's moving over soon, so we're having to figure out spending more money and making that work. And, there's all these problems, and she's going to want to put potpourri whenever she comes into the house and places. There's all these reasons. Like, what has that got to do with logic and reason? What has it got to do with logic and reason that whenever I look into the eyes of my children, who are also expensive and also bring problems in other ways, whenever I look into their tiny little eyes, that I feel that my heart could burst? Now, Francie, I can't prove that in the same way that I can prove that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but yet there it is. None of that makes sense to me. Then maybe that makes sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to a guy like me. You see, this idea of being able to think through your heart wasn't a new notion. I thought it was, but it wasn't. The idea of to live a life from love wasn't a love that I had to find. It was finding love that was already there. It's not about proving that love exists within me. I already knew that. It was about saying that that's what it is. And that's a place from which I can think. It wasn't a case of going around, shopping around churches, synagogues and mosques or whatever to try and find God. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I have no opinion on that. But what we're talking about here is this great reality that is to be found deep down within. So is that where the God is to be found for me and only for me working through the program? Page 55, in the last analysis, it was only there that he was to be found. Only there. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous is only looking at the God deep down within. And I'm not saying you can't tether that to a different belief system. But what I'm saying here is this love and this idea and this ability to see from that perspective is not something that was new to me. I don't see anywhere here where it talks about finding God in the sense that it's something that I bring in. I see it more about becoming aware of, waking up to God. It was there the whole time. The great reality was there. Now, it was obscured by all sorts of things. It was obscured by things that were going wrong. All these calamities within my life. It was obscured by my worship of anything and everything, usually the physical. But it was there the whole time. Like, this might sound a little bit left field, but I get this physical feeling just in the bottom part of my sternum. Whenever I feel true empathy and true love, I get this real physical feeling. I also get it whenever I feel sympathy and whatever. I feel this abundance of emotions physically within my body. And that to me, I'm not saying that that's where God lives. I have no idea. But, this idea that I can physically, whenever I find myself needing to remind myself that God is within me, I feel that warming up. It's like the reason why I'm saying things like that is because it was so important for me to understand that this is accessible to me. And I don't know, I'm pretty prolific whenever it comes to sponsoring. I know an awful lot of drunks. I know an awful lot of people who try to get sober. And I'm yet to meet one who isn't riddled with love at the deepest level. To a fault at times, where there's just this abundance of love busting to get out. It's my experience, Glenn, that that's where it is. And that's what I'm wanting to awaken. And that's what I'm wanting to enliven. Now, I have a spiritual belief system that I run in tandem with that. And as I say, I'm not going to elaborate on that. But this is where it begins for me. It's about finding that deep down within. Now, whenever I find it, it is covered with all this crap. And what I need to do, the program tells me based on my interpretation, is to remove everything that covers something that's already there. And what are the things that I'm having to remove? Well, they're manifestations of self. And the principal one for me was resentment. There was loads of them. There was loads of things that I resented. There's loads of people I resented. There was principles that tortured me. Principles that were part of my core thinking system that didn't serve me anymore. I wondered, did they ever? There was people who I felt that harmed me. There was institutions that I felt that harmed me. And though I never needed to like their symptoms, this program, I don't know about the whole idea of finding forgiveness through the program. I find forgiveness in all sorts of ways in life, but I don't really see where it says that. I don't need to like the symptoms of the other people who have harmed me. But what I need to do is to look at life from an entirely different angle. I need to change my perspective on all this. And it shows me how to do that. It shows me how to do that in relation to my resentments, but it also shows me how to do that in relation to fear. Because I was absolutely terrified. I know I don't have much more time left, Glenn, and I find myself not getting too far out of way agnostics because that's where I felt drawn today. But the rest of the steps are good as well. No, whenever I've got 5 minutes. Oh, really? In that case. So whenever I was able to identify what the program showed me from the fourth step, which is these manifestations of self, I was then able to do something really, really, really interesting. Now, really, really simple for to say out loud, but a wee bit more tricky for to put into reality. And that is I was able to flip my eyeballs 180 degrees backwards. Because every single one of life's experiences for me was on the outside. By the outside, what I mean is outside of my thinking. And the truth of the matter is, there is only thought. There is nothing else. I see my friend Howard as being handsome as he is because that's the image that my eyes tell me he is, and my mind translates it into the image of him being as handsome as he is. I'm sure everybody else sees it too, Howard. It's not just me. So I know Kathy does, that's for sure. So, but the point being, these are just thoughts. And this process here from, like, I did a 4-column inventory on step 4. I'm not going to debate whether 5's better than 4 or whatever. I don't know, whatever way it works for you is friggin' amazing. But this process of moving from column 3 into column 4, from moving from the cause into having a look at me. It says at the bottom of page 66, this was our course. This was our course, colon. So there's like action points. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Amazing. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. Then it has us ask God to help us show them the same pity, tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Now, I remember my grandfather, my grandfather was a pure gent, an absolute working class gent from Belfast. You would never met a nicer guy in your life. But see, whenever he was getting older and a bit senile, he was maybe saying things to waitresses in restaurants that maybe you shouldn't be saying. Once he was in the hospital and the nurses were around, he was definitely saying it. Now, we didn't think, oh my God, he's a bad person. You know, nor did we think, oh, I like his symptoms. We thought, he's not well. He's not well. That was it. He was not well. And if I can get into that frame of mind by looking at the people towards whom I felt resentments, that's an amazing thing. Now, the bad news is I can't. But we ask God to help us. And with the application of this program, I was able to do that. And then the real moving inwards then, after I'd sat down and talked about this with another man. Now, I actually did my 5th step with lots of people. Now, in my sponsorship lineage, we do multiple 5th steps because the way we interpret the top of page 74, person or persons. And it's my experience that, you know, see if anybody says to me, I know something that's on your 5th step, I'm going to blackmail you. I would say, amazing, go ahead, because I'm so free of that shit. I've told everybody I couldn't care less. But then the steps that follow right after that, the steps 6 and 7, for me are the crucial parts of this program. They're all crucial parts of the program, but it's a real pivotal point. That's where it starts turning inwards again. That's where I'm starting to rely on God. That's where I'm starting to see that to wrest satisfaction out of this world it's not within my gift. I can't do it even if I wanted to. That's where I'm starting to realize that my job is to ask God to give me whatever characteristics I need. I don't really believe in the whole list of character defects that you chip away at. I believe in giving God all of me, the good and the bad. And you see, in any one given moment, give me what I need. You know, don't have me figure that out. Don't have me rely on that. Just give me what I need in this moment. Give me what I need to be of service to you and my fellows. Please do that. Because by doing that, Glenn, I can't help but stay within thought. And whenever I find myself drifting in resentment, the past, or fear, the future, what I need is to get back into the present by removing those blocks and stay in this present moment, which is where God lives. And God brings an absolute abundance of joy. I was reading something today. It's not from the book Alcoholics Anonymous, so not expand on it, that said that if you're not feeling joy, then you know you're not connected to God. How simple is that? If you're not feeling joy, you're not connected to God. Now, if somebody's just lost a loved one and they're deep in grief, that's not what it means. But there's things that I can do in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, in particular in step 10, that would have me address those. And whenever it's really stubborn, it would have turn my thoughts to someone I can help. My thoughts, by getting my thoughts back into the presence, back into being aligned. One thing that works whenever all other measures fail is to be of service to other alcoholics. I adore alcoholics and I feel their pain. There's somebody very, very close to me that whenever she drank alcohol, she got abusive, but she needed to get a detox and she was going to the hospital and they wouldn't see her because she was abusive to the nursing staff. And quite rightly, they shouldn't tolerate that. What do you do about a thing like that? What do you do about a thing like that where this person can't help being like that, but the institution in question have a zero tolerance policy to that, and they're right to. Don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing those guys. What do you do about a thing like that? You phone a guy like me, that's what you do about a thing like that. You phone my friend Kathy, say, you need some help here, and we find ways to help people. Now, the principal way that I help people is take them through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. We start at the title page and we go to page 164. I try not to put too much of my interpretation on it because how the other guy chooses to interpret it, especially the stuff about God, is entirely within their gift. And at the end of this process, I can safely say that the consciousness of the presence of God within my heart is the only thing that matters. And whenever I keep that focus like that, weird things happen. Like, I almost factor in the serendipity now. Like, I'm in business, and whenever I'm sitting down with my two partners in the business and I'm saying, well, what are we going to do about the miracles we need to factor in? They just go, oh, here he goes again. But that's my reality. My reality is that I bask in the glory, I was going to say of a miracle, but an abundance of miracles every single day. So if you come to Alcoholics Anonymous because you want to fight alcohol one day at a time and just don't drink, don't come to me because I can't help you because I find that shit boring. But if you come to Alcoholics Anonymous because you want a life of abundance and you want a life beyond your wildest dreams, I wouldn't be the worst guy to give a call. Glenn, thank you so much for inviting me.